For the months of July and August, I Love My HBCU the podcast is going on hiatus. And I hope that you have enjoyed all the conversations in season one. We look forward to bringing you some new and engaging conversations in season two coming in September. So mark your calendars. In the meantime, we're running back some of the episodes that sparked a lot of discussion. So sit back and enjoy this dynamic conversation with HBCU Made. Welcome to I Love My HBCU ? The podcast where we express our undeniable love for HBCUs, but where we are also not afraid to address a few tough questions. So, sit back, learn a little, love a lot, and rep your HBCU. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of I Love My HBCU ? I am ecstatic is the right word to welcome Council President Nick Mosby to I Love My HBCU ? If you know anything about him, you know he is a proud HBCU alum from Tuskegee University, but I'm going to be
100%.
quiet. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dr. Tolson. Thank you so much for having me on. Look forward to talking about how I love my HBCU.
I love it. I love it. So Tuskegee University. So you share something. So for those who've been listening, they know that my academic home is Morgan State University. I love my HBCU ? Has nothing to do with Morgan. However, I rep Morgan State University hard. And you share something with my president.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, another Tuskegee man.
There we go. There we go.
I always I don't hesitate to not say that. I've had a couple of speeches at Morgan and talk about all the exciting things that are happening on the campus and his leadership. And I don't hesitate to talk about that it's done by a Tuskegee man.
Yes. Listen. Can I say that? Listen, I can say that because I've got a Tuskegee man on the episode today. When I watch some of our Black men doing some amazing things, there's some commonalities you have. And Tuskegee, for some of you, happen to be one of those commonalities.
So it's a lot of amazing people doing a lot of amazing things that Tuskegee was their home. So, very proud to be an alum and definitely excited about, all the experiences I had there and how I can pass it on to other folks.
So for those who don't know you, those who are local to Baltimore know exactly who you are. I like to call you one of those extremely active members of our city. But for those who don't know you, what does council president, I'm going to keep on saying council president because that's your full title.
Well, hopefully throughout this process, you'll just say Nick.
Nick,
but people know my title, council president, Dr. Tolson.
No, call me Tosin. You're doing that intentionally. So Nick, what does Nick like about Baltimore, especially in this role of yours where it has you touching several parts of the city?
Well, that's a great question. I love my job. I love serving. I love being a voice in the room. That has a certain amount of shared experiences that maybe are unique to those rooms and as it relates to those decision making from a policy perspective. I love, understanding and knowing my background and my story and, how I can try to uplift, other young folks in our city. A lot of times we just like to look at ourselves in the mirror and figure out what we've done, the successes that we have, but we also kind of forget about who we were, right? So I don't forget about the little boy who grew up in Northeast Baltimore, in a 3-bedroom house with 6 women. I don't forget about sleeping on the top bunk and my sister right under me and my mother in the same bedroom and watching her wake up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, catch 2 buses to put food on our table. I don't forget about the kids I grew up with, particularly in middle school, that were just as smart as me, didn't have the same level of opportunities and kind of where they are. So I don't forget about my background and who I am. And I think that really pushes me to continue to serve, because being a public servant, particularly in a city like Baltimore that has been disproportionately divested in from our federal government, our state government, and in Black and brown communities, our local government, it's hard work and it's a lot of sacrifice, but, I do it for those reasons because, like I said, I don't forget about where I come from and the folks that I try to speak up for on a regular basis.
As I listen to you, I hear the person, the human in civic engagement, and the human in politics. And I want to lean on that ever so slightly, because when I speak to my students, my young Black and brown students, give or take 18 to 22-year-olds, they are turned off of politics. And it's not that Tosin wants to shove politics down anybody's throats.
Yeah.
It's knowing that we can't actually shun it, and we actually have to play different active roles in it. And hearing what you just said, I hope for the students who are listening, who are turned off of politics, they just see the human in the politics, and they see the human in the civic engagement. Because everything you just rattled off, and you rattled it off so quickly, I don't see how a young person doesn't relate to some of those things. And it doesn't have to do with all those policies, right?
Yeah. I mean, to that point, Dr. Tolson, I'm still calling you doctor.
Tosin.
But no, to that point, I mean, look, if I'm growing up in a certain circumstance and my grandfather grew up in that same circumstance, and he's been pushing this idea of voting, he's been pushing this idea of this system that's supposed to benefit my family, my community, folks around me, and it has not, I start to lose trust in that system. I start to kind of take back from the system. So that's why it's so important for folks who have the cultural competency to run for office, to be in these positions of, creating policy, but also with this heart of understanding that empathy that sits out there, it sits out there for a real reason.
Yes.
And we can't allow like the sacrifice, or, a lot of people say a thankless job. It's a reason that folks feel like they don't need to thank you, because the circumstances that they're in and the conditions that they've been brought up in their environment. So, that's the first thing I talk to young electeds about not being discouraged, about understanding, you're getting up, you're doing your job, but you're also representing an institution that has failed these communities for decades. And so regardless of my background, regardless of, how I'm trying to, be the voice of the voiceless or shine light on darkness, the reality is, to certain folks in our community, and rightfully so, I am still the system. I am still that institution. I mean, the Baltimore City Council was the first legislative body in the entire country to pass racial zoning laws that say Black people could only live here, which was really like the precursor to redlining and what we talk about. At the end of the day, I'm president of that institution that did that. Regardless, I mean, there's still residual effects of it that we still see in our city charter, and that we still see and have impacted our people. So I think that that's really important. It's both sides. It's like understanding, knowing why there's an empathy, and trying to dismantle it that way.
I could not appreciate you more for breaking it down that way. And again, I'm going to keep on saying this. I do hope, it's one of the reasons why before we hit record, I told you that you are an important guest to me on this episode. Especially as an election year is coming up, I do hope more of our students are listening to the council president, Nick Mosby's of the world, to hear how they position the humanity that still needs to exist within politics. I'm going to shift back to HBCUs for
back to
a
Tuskegee?
second. Absolutely, but not necessarily Tuskegee alone, but just your love of HBC, right?
Yeah.
So I have this thing on the podcast called the Rapid Fire segment. Nick Mosby should know this. Okay, it's 67 seconds on the clock, not 60. Why do you think it's 67 seconds?
Because 7's the best number. It's my line number.
I was about to say that's his line number.
You've done your research. It's my line number. It's in my zip code. It's my football. It's my high school football number. Everything that's related to 7 is my daughter's birthdays, both of them. I mean, it's a lot of 7. So you have done your research, Dr. Tosin. I'm impressed.
I know. That's not the reason why it's 67 seconds. All your reasons are good. All your reasons are good. But it's 67 seconds because 10 HBCUs were founded in 1867.
I was about to say that next, Dr. Tosin. I was. Land grant institution. Yeah.
I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you.
All right,
Okay,
you
we're
got
gonna
it to
put
me. All right,
67 seconds on the clock,
let's go.
and let's go. First question: describe your HBCU experience in one word.
Magnificent.
Magnificent. If your time, this is a good one. You're not allowed to use the Q song. Okay, you're not allowed to use this one.
All right.
If
No
your
atomic thought.
time in if your time in college was a song, what song would it be?
It would be Jay-Z and Memphis Bleak, Coming to Age sequel 2.
Okay, I don't know it, but okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was my interview song. So whenever I had an interview my senior year, I would like play that song like 20 times before I went to my interview.
I love it. I love it. If you remember, what was your best meal in college?
It was probably people at Tuskegee are gonna say from the chicken coop, but I would say from Fred's fish truck. So we used to go and get these fish sandwiches on bread and I would put mustard and hot sauce on it, but that was always a fun treat in Tuskegee.
Lovely,
But
lovely.
most folks are gonna say the chicken coop.
The
I'll say
chicken coop.
Fred's.
No, we're going with your answer.
You know, Fred's.
Shout out your favorite professor or administrator or person at Tuskegee University, then or now.
I would say she's still there as Miss Henderson.
Miss
I wouldn't have
Henderson.
graduated from Tuskegee. I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for Miss Henderson. When I got my job, I sent her 2 dozens of roses because who she was and what she meant to me. And we probably should talk about that story later on, but we only got 67 seconds.
We will. And the
All right.
67 seconds are up. However,
Oh, man.
however,
I did
I
a
always
horrible
do
job.
this.
All right.
I always take the liberty of asking one more question just because it's fun. Do you remember who your commencement speaker was?
I don't.
I don't remember mine either.
Yes.
So we're in the same boat.
I mean, to be honest, I have no idea who it was.
I don't remember. It slightly embarrasses me, but not so much. But I don't remember mine either, which makes me wonder how important those things are on some days.
Well, I started thinking about like how many speeches have I given, and the young folks remembered or didn't remember me. I hope that they remember. I hope I was impactful.
You were. You're Nick Mosby. You're impactful. So before we get to Miss Henderson, because I do want to hear the Miss Henderson story, I do want to know.
Say that
how
again?
do you go? I do want to know your college selection journey. So how do you go from Baltimore to Tuskegee? How did you make that selection?
All right. So in Baltimore, I went to a middle school that grossly underprepared me for a school that I was able to get in. The best high school in the entire country, the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. So I got into Poly because I wanted to be an engineer, but I was coming from a school called Chinquapin where I just had basic math. At the time, Poly, your freshman year, you started in Algebra 2. So I didn't have pre-algebra. I didn't have Algebra 1. My first math class was Algebra 2.
Wow.
My mother found a program that summer called Upward Bound. And that was for a first-time college student, the underserved definition, where throughout the school year, they would give you tutoring on Saturdays, but also during the summertime, you would spend 6 weeks on a college campus.
Nice.
Well, I did Upward Bound my entire 4 years at Poly. It helped get me through Poly. And then in like my junior year, we went on a college tour. And I'm the first person in my family to go away to college. So, wasn't a lot of institutional knowledge in my family about where to go, how, all that. So anyway, Upward Bound takes us away. We go on this college tour. And I won't tell you the HBCU name, but we came back and they said, well, what schools do you guys want to apply to? And I told Mr. Green, I said, Mr. Green, I want to go to this school. It's HBCU. And he said, Nick, I think you're a little better than that school. I think you should kind of look at other schools. Hey, I'm not joking. I didn't say the name. I'm not going to say the name. I am not going to say the name. But it was out of state, right? So he said, well, just keep looking. And, but I think that you can get to another school. You want to go to HBCU, but I think that you can get to better school. So I'll never forget this. I went home maybe a couple weeks later. In the mail, that's when you took like the PSAT or SAT in colleges that sent you all this mail. I had a pamphlet from Tuskegee, and it had like Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, had all these history stuff, and I love history, particularly Black history. So I went back that Saturday, and Mr. Green, I said, well, Mr. Green, what about Tuskegee? Like, is that like one of these other schools? Because I mean, we take it for granted because we've gone through the process, but you kind of understand and know, like, oh, this school's good for that major. That school's just kind of fronting like they're good for that. But you don't know. College is college, right? My mother was excited for me to go to any college, right? It could be the Dr. Tolson College of whatever. And she'd be like, you're going to college, great, right? We didn't really understand or know, right? So I went back and he's like, yeah, Tuskegee's a great place. So what Mr. Green did, he got on the phone with the Upward Bound down in Tuskegee, Miss Woodson. Shout out to Miss Woodson. And he arranged, Upward Bound paid for me to fly down to Tuskegee. Yeah. He arranged with her for me to stay on campus for like a weekend, go through the whole tour process, fill out an application process, try to get acceptance process. Ultimately, I went down there, was by myself on campus, but loved the experiment, loved the opportunity, decided that's where I wanted to go. Nice. And that's how I chose to go to Tuskegee. I wanted to go to a HBCU. I wanted at the time major in aerospace engineering. Ultimately, I switched to electrical engineering, but that was my decision-making factor of going to Tuskegee.
Wow. So, you know what's funny? Most of the time when we ask that, not funny, interesting is a better word. Most of the time when I ask that question, I always hear that the deciding factor was money, like a scholarship. For yours, it sounded as if it was based on what you wanted to study and a mentor's belief in your greatness and what your greatness needed to be associated with. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And let me be clear, I started out with a scholarship. Okay. So that was I'm pretty sure money was kind of
played a role.
But yeah. I got a whole money story about Tuskegee as well. So I'm not sure we're gonna have time to get in that, but that's the next chapter in this. I love my HBCU story.
We'll bring you back. We're going to bring you back for that story because I want to hear about Miss Henderson. Tell us about Miss Henderson.
It's actually connected to Miss Henderson.
Then tell it. Go ahead.
All right. So I tell young folks this story all the time. So, you know, like my first time getting on a plane, I packed like 12 bags, just throwing all my stuff in different bags. Go to the airport. They're like, sir, you can't bring 12 bags on this plane. I'm like, what? They know you can only check into whatever. I don't know. Then you have to pay extra amount for the ones that are over. So I try to consolidate my bags as much as possible. Whatever. Finally get on the plane, have to pay a couple $100s. You know, I don't have the couple $100s. The money I saved up that summer. Shout out to Inroads, which was my internship organization. I got in as a senior coming out of high school. But anyway, go down with my mother, land in Montgomery, Alabama. We drive to Tuskegee. She drops me off campus, get my dorm room. We meet back up the next day. My mother's like bawling in tears outside of my dorm because she's about to leave and fly back to Baltimore. And now it's my turn to go in and register. So I go stand in line 2-3 hours, I don't know, waiting, Tuskegee Gymnasium, go up front, fill out all the paperwork. The women say, look, everything's perfect. Your schedule's perfect. All we need is, I don't know, $1,700, whatever the amount was. It was money that I did not have. I said, ma'am, I don't have that money. She said, well, you have to go to the financial aid office. So I go to the financial aid office, wait in line again for another hour, fill out all these forms, again, loans and stuff for my mother, you know, can't figure out the money situation, whatever. And I'm assigned a financial aid counselor. Bingo, Miss Henderson.
Miss Henderson.
So, long story short, I had this problem. There's always this running joke of all my friends in campus. Like, is Nick registered yet? Because every single time, come back to school, however I got down to Tuskegee, that's a whole nother story. Hitchhiking and planes and trains and automobiles and whatever. However I got back to Tuskegee, it was always like, is Nick in school yet? And I say that because my junior year, the Board of Regents of Tuskegee came down and said, hey, if you have a balance, you're going to be withdrawing from school. You have to automatically withdraw. Wow. And, you know, so I remember taking that death walk, you know, I walked to the bursar's office, stand in line again for like an hour and go up and I never forget. I say student ID 106306. You know, that was my student ID. We'll never forget that number because I had to use it so much and go through this process so much. And the woman looks down and she says, in her Alabama accent, baby, you don't owe any money. I said, I don't owe any money. So being from Baltimore, I said, well, I need you to print that out. Print that out.
Yes.
I want the piece of paper. Nick Mosby, 106, 306, zero balance. So she prints it out. I'm like, boom. I'm like, well, do you have the transactions, of this account? She's like, yeah, sure. So she goes to another screen. She said, this is weird. 5,000, 4,000, whatever my balance was at the time, was paid on was put on your in your account yesterday. I was like, can you print that out too? So she prints that out, and I take that paper and I run. Who do I run to? Miss Henderson.
Miss Henderson.
So I go to Miss Henderson and I shut the door. She said, Nick Mosby, I knew I was going to see you here today. And I said, Miss Henderson, I said, I just went to the bursar. I knew I was getting put out of school. I had no idea how I was going to get home. I had to call my mother because at this point, nobody knows I'm about to be put out of school. So she's like, she said, look, she said, we know that, everybody's getting withdrawn if they have a balance. There's a pot of money that, that was allocated for students. Most of the counselors gave out $500 here or $1,000 there. She was like, I gave you most of my money. And she said, the reason why is I know the only thing that's going to stop you from living out all the dreams you talked to me about in Baltimore and all you want to do is money. That's going to stop you from getting this diploma. And, I hugged her, and it was like a real special moment to me. It was like such a huge relief, off of me. And, ultimately I graduated. And like I said, when I got my first job, I sent her 2 dozens of roses. So whenever I go back to homecoming, I make sure I go to find her and see her. But it was literally Miss Henderson that didn't send me back to Baltimore. And the reality is, leaving a school like that with that type of debt, coming back home, having to withdraw from school classes, I know I probably would have never graduated from Tuskegee. Probably been a challenge to kind of eventually pay off the debt or, try to figure it out. So Miss Henderson really kind of propelled my next chapter in my life.
That was a story worth hearing. I've never heard it before. That's Miss Henderson, wherever you are. God bless you.
Shout out to Miss Henderson.
Yes, that was a story worth hearing, and it's a reminder. Oh Lord, it's a reminder of so many things. So many students are probably going through similar situations, not because of withdrawal situations and so on and so forth, but it is mind-numbing to me how much finance plays such a chokehold. I don't have any other word to use on the education journey of most of our HBCU students, that I'm hoping there's a resolve that makes sense for those who can't afford it at some point in time. Nick, what's the best advice you'd have for your freshman self today?
Don't
take 12
advice I'd have. It's what everybody tells you. It's a generic one. Time management.
Time management.
So much going on campus. Always recreational things to do or new people to meet or things to see, but, really trying to, not cram, but develop a solution of time management to, appropriately map out the time that you need for education, but then also for your social life on campus. That's a big transition into college.
You've got two. You mentioned one of them earlier on based on a birthday. You've got two brilliant daughters. They are I've met them more than 2 times. They are brilliant, period. They just are artistic, talented, bright. And I know mom's got to say so in this as well, to some degree, because they have the say so ultimately. But if you could pick, and they wanted to go to an HBCU, where would you pick for them?
That would be challenging. I mean, I'm not one of these folks. I love my HBCU, but I'm not the type of parent that's like, you got to go to my alma mater because of family legacy. I think that, each HBCU, and that's why it's exciting, has its own characteristics, right?
Absolutely.
Some kids want to be further away from home. Some kids want to be closer. Some schools are better from a technical perspective. Others are better from a liberal arts perspective.
Yes.
Some are better as it relates to postgraduate, like getting you into the postgraduate type of track that you need to get into, so there's so many different, I mean, I think a lot of times when we talk about HBCUs, we kind of like put it all in like this ambiguous bag of schools. But the reality is the complexity of our HBCUs are so amazing. I
Yes.
mean, you look at even like here in Baltimore, the differences between like a Morgan State and maybe a smaller school like a Coppin State. And like, what does that mean for an individual student to come in, be prepared enough to be successful in those environments, right?
Yes.
And so when you go around the country, all HBCUs aren't created equal. Mr. Green was exactly right. If I would have went to that school, I don't know if I would have the same pathways that I had to get to where I wanted to be. And he knew what I wanted to do, and he knew that maybe he used the wrong words of you're better than that school, but that wasn't the school for me. So
Yes.
what I'm going to do is just open up the process to my daughters, allow them to kind of be exposed to it, and then ultimately provide them advice or guidance based off of my
Mm-hmm.
experiences and my know-how to hopefully come up with a great selection. But both are extremely interested in going to historically Black college and university.
Okay. 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 That's good. That's good. And even if they don't end up at an HBCU, they're amazing. Again, I've met them, so I'm not just saying this because he's here. They are pretty amazing.
I would
Finish
be
this.
surprised. Now, this is what I will say. I'll be surprised if they, from an undergraduate perspective, they don't choose a HBCU. I would be
You'll be
surprised.
surprised if they don't choose an
Don't choose
HBCU
for undergrad. Yeah,
for
for undergrad.
undergrad. Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. Finish the sentence for me. Because of my experience at my HBCU, I will not.
Because of my experiences at an HBCU, I will not. Um, that's a tough one. I will not. You're stumping me. I will not. Um, I will not forget the significance of a college band. Because when the Marching Pipers walked through the yard at Tuskegee University, everybody and their mother stopped and paid attention. And I was coming from an area like in Baltimore where maybe in high school bands weren't that important,
Mm.
particularly my high school. I mean, folks at City would probably say that band was important, but we didn't even have a band when I went to in my high school. So just the appreciation of like and the tapestry of all the different instruments and the enthusiasm. It really is like a really important thread to like the HBCU campus. And it's funny now to see it exposed. I mean, Alabama A&M was the first HBCU band to lead the Macy's Day Parade. They ultimately are the first HBCU band to ever exist. So, the history that they have. But it's funny to see like how from a national perspective, particularly like the big
Mm.
predominantly white schools are taking on and adopting some of the things that these HBCUs have been doing forever. I saw an Auburn game this year where they did swag surf. The band was leading, and the whole crowd was kind of doing swag surf, which is cool. But if you're from an HBCU, that's like
It's
uh,
basic for us. It's what
yeah,
we
it's
do.
it's a staple in like a homecoming and everything. So I think the exposure, and I think one of the big part is and I'll be real, like Jackson State and what Deion Sanders did from a
Yes,
football perspective and exposing a lot of the culture nationally because he had that platform to do so. It's
absolutely.
providing a lot of opportunities for things. So I would say the band. I will never forget the importance of the band on the yard.
You mentioned that, and I recall when President David Wilson at Morgan State University, when he came to Morgan, always talked, at least my one-on-one conversations with him, about how Tuskegee University's band was sometimes the heartbeat of student life, student culture, student energy. And it's something that it literally had its own heartbeat for the campus. So it's interesting you would mention that, because that's the first thing I thought about. I was like, hold on, David Wilson said that if you listen to, I mean, we love Morgan State University's band. I'm sorry. I'm really, really proud of our band. But if you hear Tuskegee University's band, there's something about it just bringing all the students together. So that's a good
Yeah.
one.
They would randomly like walk through campus at night, just like the whole band just playing, and everybody would run out and go look to see. And it's the whole they wear these paper bags over their heads, which was kind of weird. I don't really know the band culture and
Yeah.
the symbolism of all that, but it was
Yeah.
it was always a joy and a treat.
That's amazing. Before you leave us, Nick, I want you to leave our audience with a parting word or phrase or short phrase on why you specifically love HBCUs.
Well, I think HBCUs is a symbolic representation of like the importance of education to us individually, but more importantly, collectively. As I sit as city council president, I think the one thing that we don't give HBCUs enough credit for is, they're like probably the biggest variable of increasing middle class opportunities for African Americans. The thing about like, myself, I'm 44 years old, first person in my family to go away to college. But what that has done not only for um, my young daughters, but also for the generations that put me in a position to be able to do so. And then the family members that are in my family that have gone on to college since. So, I'm thankful for my HBCU experience. I wouldn't trade it in for anywhere. I know majoring in something like electrical engineering, transitioning from like a school like in Baltimore to a place like Tuskegee was just like the perfect landing pad for me to like excel academically while growing as a man and growing professionally. So again, I wouldn't trade my experience at Tuskegee for anything.
You heard it from Nick Mosby, Council President Nick Mosby of Baltimore City. I appreciate you for being my guest at this episode. I hope, most importantly, that when my students, especially, and when I say my students, I really am referring to every HBCU student in the country and not just my personal students at Morgan State University, when they hear you, they remember the humanity in our civic engagement and politics because it is important to the fabric of our lives. And they remember that they have a role to play in it as well. But they also remember that Nick Mosby is an amazing human being who gives people credit when they show up in his life. Because I'm going to remember the Miss Henderson story. I'm sorry, but
Remember
I'm
Miss
going
Henderson,
to.
and
I'm
don't,
going to
don't forget
remember
about Miss Woodson and Mr. Green. All three of them.
all
They're
three
part
of
of my
them.
Tuskegee story.
I appreciate you. I thank everyone who has watched us and everyone listening to the sound of our voices for tuning into I Love My HBCU this episode. Till next week, yours in HBCU love. Nick Mosby, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tolson. I look forward to coming back on. Got a couple other stories for you too. So whenever I come back on, I got another really, really funny and important Tuskegee story. But thanks for having me on today.
I can't wait. Thank you.
You've been listening to I Love My HBCU ? Let's keep the conversation going as we share our stories and encourage more practical support of HBCUs, whilst of course holding each other accountable. Don't forget to follow and subscribe for the latest episodes. Until next time, love and lift your HBCU.